In 1963, General Motors had a rule. No division could install an engine larger than 330 cubic inches in any mid-size car. It was a corporate safety policy born from the fear that putting too much power in a smaller, lighter vehicle would lead to lawsuits and bad press. Every division followed that rule. Chevrolet, Buick, Oldsmobile, all of them stayed under the limit. But then there was Pontiac. Inside Pontiac's engineering offices in Pontiac, Michigan, 3 men had been staring at the mid-size Tempest for months. John DeLorean, the division's chief engineer, Bill Collins, who ran advanced engineering, and Russ G., a chassis specialist who understood what the Tempest frame could handle. They all knew the same thing. The Tempest was lighter than Pontiac's full-size cars. It had a solid chassis. And if you put the division's 389 cubic inch V8 engine under its hood, you would have something that nobody in Detroit was building. A mid-size car with full-size power, affordable enough for a young buyer and fast enough to be dangerous in the best possible way. The problem was the General Motors rule. 330 cubic inches was the ceiling, and the 389 was 59 cubic inches past it. So DeLorean and his team did something clever. Instead of proposing a new car to General Motors corporate leadership, which would have triggered a review and almost certainly a rejection, they classified the big engine as an option package on the existing Tempest. Check a box on the order form, pay a little extra, and your Tempest arrived with the 389. Technically, they never asked permission to build a new model. They just offered a different engine option on an existing one. General Motors' 14th floor, where the corporate executives worked, did not catch it until GTOs were already rolling off the assembly line and onto dealer lots across the country. Pontiac set an internal sales target of 5,000 units for the 1964 model year. They figured it was a niche product. A handful of performance buyers would check the box, and the rest of the Tempest line would carry on as usual. It was supposed to be a quiet offering. What happened on showroom floors across America was anything but quiet. Jim Wangers was the man behind that. Wangers worked at Pontiac's advertising agency, McManus, John, and Adams, and he understood something that most people in Detroit did not. He understood that the buyer for this car was not the typical new car customer walking into a dealership in a sport coat. The buyer was young. The buyer was male. The buyer cared about one number above all others, and that number was quarter-mile time. Wangers pushed to get GTO review cars into the hands of the right automotive magazines. He arranged drag strip demonstrations. He convinced Pontiac to sponsor performance events, and he helped commission a song. Ronnie and the Daytonas released GTO in 1964, and it climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. A car that Pontiac expected to sell 5,000 units was suddenly showing up in pop songs on AM radio. By the end of 1964, Pontiac had sold over 32,000 GTO models. That was more than 6 times the original target. Dealers had waiting lists. The GTO became its own standalone model for 1966. No longer just a Tempest option package, it was the fastest-selling performance car in America. And every other manufacturer in Detroit was watching. The first response actually came before the GTO even hit dealer lots. Ford had been developing its own youth market car in parallel, and the Mustang launched in April 1964 at the New York World's Fair. But the Mustang was a different animal. It was a pony car, smaller, lighter, positioned as sporty but not necessarily fast. Ford sold over 400,000 Mustangs in its first year, a number that broke every sales record in Detroit. But in terms of raw straight-line speed, the GTO owned that conversation. So Ford went bigger. The 1967 Mustang received the 390 cubic inch V8 as an option. And by 1968, the 428 Cobra Jet turned it into a car running a 13-second quarter mile at the drag strip. Ford was not the only manufacturer watching the GTO eat into their market share. Chevrolet answered with the Chevelle SS396. Plymouth stripped a mid-size Belvedere down to its bare essentials, gave it a 383 V8, named it the Roadrunner, and priced it below $3,000 to put raw muscle within reach of factory workers and college students. Dodge built the Charger, which became one of the most recognizable shapes in American automotive history. Every brand wanted its own version of what Pontiac had started, and none of them were content to be second fastest. That's when the arms race turned into something nobody in Detroit could control. Between 1966 and 1970, horsepower numbers climbed every single model year. Pontiac responded by developing the Ram Air series of 400 cubic inch engines. Ford introduced the Boss 302 and Boss 429 Mustangs. Chevrolet released the COPO Camaro, a car so fast that Chevrolet's own marketing department was nervous about advertising it. But the most significant weapon in the war came from Plymouth. The 426 Hemi produced so much power that the factory-rated horsepower numbers were deliberately underreported to keep insurance companies from losing their minds. That detail about the Hemi's real horsepower matters. Remember it. By 1970, the American muscle car had reached its absolute peak. Walk into any dealership in any mid-size American city that year, and you could order a factory car capable of running the quarter mile in the low 13-second range. There was the Chevelle LS6 with a 454 cubic inch engine rated at 450 horsepower, the Plymouth Hemi Cuda, the Buick GSX Stage 1 with 510 pound-feet of torque, a number that made it one of the most underrated muscle cars ever built. The Pontiac GTO Judge, painted in orbit orange with a Ram Air 4 engine and a rear spoiler that served no aerodynamic purpose whatsoever, but looked absolutely perfect sitting in a high school parking lot. Over 1 million muscle cars were sold across all brands in the United States in 1970. Gas was cheap, roads were wide, and American culture had organized itself, at least in part, around the experience of driving something loud and fast on a Friday night. That was the peak of the American muscle car. And peaks, by definition, are followed by something else. The first threat didn't come from foreign competition or changing tastes. It came from actuarial tables. Insurance companies had been watching the muscle car market with growing concern throughout the late 1960s. Young men between the ages of 18 and 25 were buying these cars in enormous numbers. And young men between the ages of 18 and 25 were crashing them in enormous numbers. Hospital bills, totaled vehicles, wrongful death claims. The data was unambiguous. Starting in 1969, insurance premiums on high-performance vehicles began climbing sharply. A 20-year-old buying a new 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda might pay more per year in insurance than the car's monthly payment. In some states, insurance on a muscle car could cost twice what insurance on a standard sedan cost. For the exact buyer that the muscle car was designed to attract, the young working-class male with money for a car payment but not much else, insurance was becoming a deal-breaker. This is why Plymouth had been underreporting the Hemi's horsepower on paper. Manufacturers knew that insurance companies were basing premiums partly on advertised horsepower numbers. So factories started playing games. Rate the engine at 335 horsepower on the spec sheet when the real output was closer to 425. Hope the insurance adjusters do not look too closely. It worked for a while, but insurance companies hired their own engineers. They tested the cars themselves, and the premiums went up anyway. If you are the kind of person who wants to understand how things actually happened, and not just what happened, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every week because the insurance problem was only the beginning. The Clean Air Act of 1970 was signed into law by Richard Nixon on December 31st. It established the Environmental Protection Agency and set strict new emissions standards that automakers would need to meet by 1975. The law was a response to visible, undeniable smog problems in cities like Los Angeles. where the air quality had become a genuine public health crisis. Brown haze sat over the San Fernando Valley on windless days. Children with asthma were being kept indoors. The science was clear, and the politics followed. For muscle car engines, the Clean Air Act was a death sentence delivered in slow motion. Meeting the new emissions standards required fundamental changes to how engines burned fuel. Compression ratios had to drop. Leaded gasoline, which high compression engines needed to run properly, was being phased out in favor of unleaded fuel. Lower compression meant less power. Catalytic converters, which would become mandatory by 1975, restricted exhaust flow and cost additional horsepower. The numbers tell the story. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was rated at 450 horsepower. By 1971, General Motors mandated a switch from gross to net horsepower ratings, which instantly made every engine look weaker on paper. But the drop was not just accounting. Real-world power was falling too. That same 454 engine, detuned for emissions compliance in 1972, produced roughly 270 net horsepower. By 1973, it was even less. The muscle car's defining feature, its power, was being regulated away one model year at a time. Pontiac felt it as acutely as anyone. The GTO's sales had already started declining from their 1966 peak of over 96,000 units. By 1971, sales had fallen to around 10,500. The car that started the entire muscle car era was fading before the regulatory hammer had even fully landed. Pontiac tried to keep it alive by offering it as an option package on the smaller Ventura for 1974, circling back to how the GTO had started a decade earlier. But the 1974 GTO came standard with a 350 cubic inch engine producing 200 net horsepower. 200. In a car whose name once meant 389 cubic inches and the kind of acceleration that pinned you to the seat. Fewer than 7,100 were sold. Pontiac discontinued the GTO option after that year. And then came October 1973. On October 17th, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries announced an oil embargo against the United States in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The embargo cut off a significant portion of America's oil supply virtually overnight. The effects were immediate and visceral. Gas stations ran dry. Lines stretched around the block in cities across the country. The federal government imposed a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour. Richard Nixon asked gas stations to stop selling fuel on Saturday nights and Sundays. Odd-even rationing systems were implemented where you could only buy gas on certain days depending on whether your license plate ended in an odd or even number. For the American car buyer, the oil crisis did not just make gas expensive, it made gas uncertain. And uncertainty changes behavior faster than price alone. A man who might still pay $4 a gallon for gas will not buy a car that gets 9 miles per gallon if he is not sure the gas station will have any fuel at all next Tuesday. The psychological shift was enormous. Overnight, fuel economy went from irrelevant to the single most important number on a car's window sticker. Small cars, imports, anything that sipped gas instead of gulping it, suddenly had waiting lists of their own. Toyota and Datsun dealerships that had struggled to move inventory in 1972 could not keep cars on the lot by early 1974. And the muscle car, the 4,000-pound big block that managed 9 miles per gallon, became the last thing any rational person would buy. The funerals on the Detroit assembly lines happened quickly after that. Ford replaced the Mustang with the Mustang II in 1974, a compact car based on the Pinto platform that weighed 1,000 pounds less than the outgoing model and came standard with a 4-cylinder engine. Car and Driver magazine put it on the cover and called it the right car at the right time, and they were probably correct, but nobody who loved the original Mustang felt good about it. Chevrolet kept the Camaro alive, but gutted its performance options. The Z28 disappeared from the lineup between 1975 and 1977. When it returned, it produced 185 horsepower from a 350 cubic inch engine, which would have been embarrassing by 1969 standards. Plymouth killed the Barracuda after 1974. The Roadrunner hung on through 1975 as a trim package on the Fury, a full-size sedan. Imagine that. The car that was born as a stripped-down street racer, named after a cartoon character because Plymouth wanted buyers to associate it with pure speed, ended its life as a sticker on the side of a family car. Dodge discontinued the Challenger after 1974. The Charger name survived, but was applied to a series of increasingly anonymous mid-size sedans throughout the late 1970s. Buick's GS, Oldsmobile's 442, AMC's Javelin, all gone by 1975. In the space of 5 years, from 1970 to 1975, the entire muscle car segment went from selling over 1 million units annually to functionally ceasing to exist. What went away was not just a type of car, it was a particular version of what Americans thought driving was supposed to feel like. The muscle car was built on an assumption that gasoline would always be cheap, that roads would always be open, that the freedom to go fast was something the country would always protect. Those assumptions turned out to be wrong, or at least temporary, and when they collapsed, the cars built on top of them collapsed too. There is a temptation to assign blame, to point at regulators or insurance companies or OPEC and say they killed the muscle car, and all of those played a role. But the muscle car was also, in a sense, unsustainable from the beginning. It was an engineering excess that existed because gas was 30 cents a gallon, and nobody had yet measured what came out of the tailpipe. The golden age was not interrupted. It ran into the natural limits of what the world was willing to tolerate. John DeLorean left Pontiac in 1969, and then he left General Motors entirely in 1973 to start his own car company. His DeLorean Motor Company later produced the stainless steel sports car made famous by Back to the Future, and it also went bankrupt. DeLorean spent the rest of his life chasing the kind of lightning he had once caught almost by accident. In a mid-size Pontiac in 1964, Jim Wangers, the advertising man who made the GTO a cultural event, continued working in automotive marketing for decades. He wrote a book about the GTO years called Glory Days. The title says everything about how the people who were there remember that time. The GTO itself came back briefly in 2004. Pontiac imported a rebadged Holden Monaro from Australia, gave it 350 horsepower LS1 V8, and called it the GTO. It was a genuinely fast car. It was also an anonymous-looking sedan that most people could not distinguish from a Grand Prix in a parking lot. It sold poorly and was discontinued after 2006. Pontiac itself was killed by General Motors during the 2009 bankruptcy restructuring. The brand that invented the muscle car did not survive to see the muscle car's second golden age, because there was a second golden age. The Dodge Challenger returned in 2008. The Chevrolet Camaro came back in 2010. The Ford Mustang never really left, but it got properly fast again with the 5.0-liter Coyote 5.8 in 2011. Horsepower numbers climbed past anything the original muscle cars ever produced. A 2023 Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat made 717 horsepower from the factory. That number would have been science fiction in 1970. But the world changed again. Dodge announced the end of the Hemi 5.8 Challenger and Charger in 2023. The Camaro was discontinued that same year. The Mustang soldiers on for now, though Ford has committed its future to electric vehicles. The muscle car is facing a second extinction, this time driven not by oil shortages, but by the global transition away from internal combustion entirely. Maybe that is the real lesson of the Pontiac GTO story. The muscle car was always a product of a specific moment, one built on cheap gas, wide roads, and a culture that associated horsepower with freedom. When those conditions existed, the muscle car thrived. When they did not, it disappeared. It was not built to last forever. It was built to be exactly what America wanted, for exactly as long as America wanted it. Whether that makes the muscle car a tragedy or a triumph probably depends on whether you ever got to drive one. If you want to see how another American icon rose and fell during this same era, that video is on screen now. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one.